"Who's hunting us?" The enemy sniper's voice cracked through the static, a whisper half fear, half disbelief, before the line went dead. In that valley, men vanished like echoes. 90 American soldiers over 18 months gone, one by one, picked off by ghosts no one could find. The mountains had become a graveyard of unanswered questions, and silence had become the enemy's favorite weapon. Then she arrived. Staff Sergeant Kira Tennant, 29 years old, 5'6", from rural Wyoming. The kind of quiet that made people underestimate her until they saw the way she held a rifle or the way her eyes caught things others missed. The bend of grass in the wind, the tremor in a soldier's voice, the rhythm of fear. The first time she walked into the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Salerno, she stopped breathing for a second. The wall in front of her was covered with photographs, a mosaic of faces frozen in time. 90 soldiers, 90 names, 90 stories cut short by a single kind of bullet. The air in that room was thick with ghosts. Colonel Harding stood beside the wall, his jaw tight, eyes red from too many nights staring at casualty reports. He didn't look at the faces anymore. He looked through them, as if he couldn't bear to see them again. "This is the Tangi Valley," he said. His voice was steady, but it carried exhaustion like a wound. 18 months of sniper fire. We've tried everything: counter teams, patrol adjustments, air overwatch. Nothing works. They shoot, they move, they disappear. Kira said nothing. She just stared at the faces. Behind her, an officer muttered something about ghost shooters. Another said, "Maybe they're just better." Better. That word stuck with her. She didn't believe in better, only in patterns, mistakes, patience. Her grandfather had taught her that. Back home, Wyoming sunsets used to bleed orange over the prairie, and her grandfather, a Marine sniper from Vietnam, would sit beside her on the porch, polishing an old Winchester rifle. He had a way of teaching without talking. When he did speak, it was never about medals or glory. It was about stillness, breathing, reading the world before it moved. "The hunter who moves first loses," he used to say. When she was 12, he started teaching her to shoot. Not for fun, not with soda cans and laughter like other kids. He taught her the way he'd been taught at Camp Pendleton in '66, deliberate, silent, almost sacred. She learned how the earth's heat bent light, how wind carved invisible rivers through air, how the body trembled right before it broke. By 16, she could hit a moving target 600 yards away, and she could tell the wind speed just by watching the way dust hung in sunlight. He used to tell her that the rifle wasn't the weapon, patience was. Now, standing in that room surrounded by photographs of the dead, she understood what he meant. Colonel Harding asked her if she had any ideas. 3 days, she said. "Give me every after-action report, every grid coordinate, every timestamp. I'll find the pattern." Captain Dressler, a man with a chest full of ribbons and a head full of arrogance, scoffed. "We've analyzed all that. There is no pattern. They're ghosts." Kira looked at him, calm but unflinching. "Ghosts leave footprints. You just don't know where to look." The room went quiet. Harding gave her the files. That night, under a red lamp in her tent, she laid out 68 incident reports on the floor, a paper graveyard. Each page was a story of chaos, loss, and unanswered radio calls. She read them one by one until her eyes blurred. Time of day, wind direction, patrol routes, the angle of the sun, every detail mattered. She didn't sleep. She just listened to the hum of generators, the distant echo of gunfire, and the desert wind scratching the canvas walls like restless ghosts. At 3 in the morning, something clicked. The pattern wasn't in the attacks, it was in the pauses between them. Every 8 to 10 days, the killings circled back to the same terrain features, 3 ridgelines overlooking the main supply route. They weren't random, they were systematic, disciplined. The realization made her stomach twist. These weren't bandits or lucky marksmen. They were trained shooters, patient, methodical and confident enough to wait weeks between kills. She thought of her grandfather's journal, the one he'd left her when he died 2 months before this deployment. The last page was burned into her memory. They always return to the high ground. Familiarity is safety. Routine is predictable. She spread her maps wider, connecting attack points with a pencil. Lines began to form, 3 arcs converging on the same choke points, each giving perfect fields of fire. 90 dead soldiers had walked through those killing zones, and every time the shooters had vanished into the rocks, invisible, untouchable. But now she could see them. The next morning she walked back into Harding's office, dusty-eyed but steady. "They're not random," she said. "They're cycling through 3 primary positions. I can predict where they'll be next." Harding frowned. "How sure are you?" 70%. Dressler scoffed again. "That's a guess." Kira looked at him without blinking. "It's better than 0, which is what you've had for 18 months. Harding hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You'll deploy alone. Radio check every 12 hours. If you don't call in, we send recovery." She nodded, understood. That night she packed light. Her M2010 rifle, 4 days' rations, spotting scope, ghillie suit, and her grandfather's journal tucked inside her chest rig. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the worn leather cover, tracing the words he'd written decades ago. "The hunter who moves first loses." She whispered it under her breath, like a prayer. Before dawn, she left the base. The sky was still black when the helicopter lifted her toward the valley, a jagged scar between mountains where shadows never seemed to fade. The pilot didn't talk. He didn't need to. Everyone on that flight knew what had happened down there. When she landed, she moved in silence. The sun crawled over the ridges, and the wind started to hum through the valley, a low, constant whisper that sounded almost human. She climbed to a ridge 1,500 meters south of the kill zone and began to build her hide. Nothing fancy, just a shallow depression covered with brush and patience. The kind of place you could vanish into if you stopped breathing long enough. The first day, nothing. The valley was quiet. Convoys moved cautiously. No shots, no movement, just heat and the heavy pulse of waiting. The second day, she heard it. Gunfire, faint but sharp, 2 pops. Then the radio chatter flared. "Contact, 2 down, returning fire." Kira's hands moved to her scope. North, 800 meters. She caught only a flicker movement near a rock shelf, then gone. She exhaled, eyes steady. They were out there. That night she didn't sleep. She listened again to the wind, to the echoes bouncing off the valley walls, trying to hear patterns in the silence. She wrote notes in her grandfather's journal beside his old sketches, marking where she believed they'd fire next. The third day came and went. Nothing. The valley felt too still, like the land itself was holding its breath. On the fourth day, just past 1,500 hours, movement. 2 figures emerged from the rocks 600 meters northeast, slow, deliberate scanning. Professional. One carried a rifle, the other a spotting scope and radio. A 2-man cell, just like she'd predicted. Her heart slowed, not sped up. Her breathing fell into rhythm, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The wind gusted northwest at 8 to 10 miles per hour. She adjusted. Range 610. Temperature high 80s. Bullet drop minimal. Through her scope, the men looked calm, like they'd done this 100 times before. They settled into a depression between boulders, rifles resting, eyes on the convoy route below. Her grandfather's words echoed again. "Patience is the most dangerous weapon you carry." She waited for the moment their bodies aligned, a 3-second window, maybe less. Half a breath in. The trigger broke clean. The first man, the spotter, fell back instantly, eyes wide. Before the echo reached them, Kira had cycled the bolt and fired again. The shooter dropped. Then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't end right away. She stayed still for 30 minutes, eyes locked on the bodies, waiting for any sign of movement. None came. "Two enemy combatants down," she whispered into her radio. "Grid 7594, waiting for confirmation." Her voice didn't shake. It never did. When the clearing team arrived hours later, they confirmed both kills. Dragunov rifle, Chinese spotting scope, maps, a notebook with coordinates that matched half the attacks. That night she sat under the stars, her rifle beside her, the valley finally quiet. 90 faces on that wall, 90 brothers she'd never met. Tonight the ghosts were finally at rest. She opened her grandfather's journal again. The last line glowed in the moonlight. "The hunter who moves first loses." And for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, she smiled, not out of pride but relief. Because she hadn't moved first. She had simply waited until the hunters revealed themselves. The valley was quiet, too quiet. After months of radio calls filled with screaming coordinates and desperate medevac requests, the sudden silence felt wrong, like the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. Kira lay in her hide for hours after the operation, still watching the two motionless bodies below. The air was thick with heat and the faint metallic smell of gunpowder that drifted on the wind. She knew better than to celebrate. In her world, nothing was final until command confirmed. But that night, when the stars came out sharp and white over the ridgelands, she felt something shift, not victory, not relief, but stillness. The kind her grandfather had described on the porch back home, when dusk fell and the air grew heavy with silence. She keyed her radio once more. No further movement, requesting permission to exfiltrate. A pause crackled through the static before a voice came back. "Copy that, Tenant. You've done enough for now. Extraction inbound at 0300. Good work." Good work. Two small words, but out here they meant someone lived because of you. When the helicopter finally came, its rotors cut through the night like a heartbeat. Dust exploded around her as it touched down. She climbed aboard, rifle in hand, journal tucked close against her chest. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up, but she didn't respond. She just stared at the valley shrinking beneath them, a scar in the earth that had swallowed 90 souls. And now, for the first time in 18 months, it was quiet. Back at Fob Salerno, Colonel Harding was waiting near the landing pad. He wasn't smiling, commanders rarely did after losses that deep, but his eyes said everything. "Two confirmed?" he asked. She nodded. "And the notebook?" She handed it over. Coordinates, attack patterns, looks like part of a 3-man cell. He studied her face for a moment. "You good?" "I'm fine," she said, but her eyes told a different story, one even she didn't want to read yet. The next 48 hours blurred into debriefs, reports, and silence. The recovered notebook was translated and analyzed. The pages were crude, hand-drawn maps of the valley, with marks and circles exactly where her predictions had been. On the back cover, a list of dates. The next one was 2 weeks from that day. That detail changed everything. It meant she hadn't just eliminated 2 shooters. She had disrupted a system. Intelligence cross-checked the handwriting against previous finds and confirmed what Harding feared. These weren't freelancers. They were connected to a regional insurgent commander who had once trained with foreign advisors, disciplined, precise, patient, professionals. But there was something else, something that made the analysts go quiet when they saw it. On the bottom of one page, scrawled in faded ink, was a single word in English. Hunter. It wasn't a name, it was a reference, a warning, a clue that someone out there already knew about her or at least knew what she was. By the 3rd day, the analysis confirmed a 3rd shooter still at large, the last surviving member of the cell. The other 2 had been his spotter and partner. Together, they'd killed over 40 Americans. Alone, he was wounded but dangerous. And he would come back. Because men like that always did. Kira sat in her quarters, staring at her grandfather's journal again. The leather had darkened from years of sweat and dust. Inside were yellowed pages filled with notes, drawings, and the kind of wisdom that came only from experience. She turned to the last line again, the one she knew by heart. The hunter who moves first loses. But something about it gnawed at her now. Because this time, she wasn't sure who the hunter was anymore. When Harding called her in for the next briefing, his tone was measured, careful. "We're calling this one Operation Stillwind. We believe the third shooter is relocating to the eastern ridge, higher terrain, wider field of fire. Drone teams spotted unusual movement near an abandoned outpost. We'll confirm within 48 hours." She nodded. "You'll deploy again, but not alone this time," he added. "Command wants a spotter with you, someone to handle comms and overwatch." Her jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, I work cleaner solo." "I know," Harding said quietly, "but orders are orders. And frankly, if this last guy's half as good as we think, I don't want you in those hills without a second set of eyes." That second set of eyes turned out to belong to Sergeant Daniel Reyes, 27, soft-spoken, newly assigned from another unit after losing 3 men to sniper fire weeks earlier. He met Kira outside the armory, rifle slung, expression uncertain. "Your tenant, right?" She nodded, tightening the strap on her pack. "Harding says you're the reason the valley went quiet." She didn't look up, for now. Reyes hesitated. "You always this talkative?" "Only when it matters." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll save my jokes for later." They moved out before dawn again, this time on foot. The ridgelines loomed like the spines of sleeping giants, casting long shadows across the valley. The air was thin, cold, clean, and heavy with memory. Halfway up the slope, Reyes stopped to catch his breath. "You ever get used to it?" he asked. "What?" "The quiet after a firefight." Kira glanced back. "No, you just learn not to fill it." They reached the outpost by mid-morning, a shattered skeleton of sandbags and broken stone. Bullet holes scarred the walls. It smelled like time and dust. Kira moved through the debris like a ghost, scanning for vantage points, light angles, sightlines. Reyes watched her work, impressed. She never rushed, never second-guessed. Every movement had purpose, every pause meaning. By noon, they found the high ground hide, a narrow ridge with visibility across the valley floor. From there, she could see the road where convoys moved, tiny dots of motion against the brown expanse. She unpacked her rifle, adjusted the bipod, and settled in. Reyes set up the spotting scope beside her. "Harding said you grew up around rifles," he said, trying to make small talk. "My grandfather taught me." "Vietnam." She nodded. "He must have been proud." Kira's jaw tightened slightly. "He died before I deployed." "Sorry," Reyes said quietly. "What'd he teach you?" She exhaled. "That shooting isn't about killing. It's about understanding who you're aiming at." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful, the kind that soldiers share when words become unnecessary. By evening, the sun started bleeding orange through the haze. The air shimmered. Shadows stretched long and deep. And then movement. Far below, a flicker of reflection, sunlight off glass. Reyes caught it first. "You see that?" Kira was already on her scope. "Yeah." 200 meters east of the old dry creek bed, a man was crawling uphill, deliberate, careful, using every rock for cover. Her breath steadied. "He's setting up." Reyes checked his rangefinder. 712 meters. Wind. 5 miles an hour from northwest. She adjusted, micro-corrections of instinct and muscle memory. Through her scope, she could see him settle in Dragunov again. The same weapon, same discipline. This wasn't coincidence. "He's good," Reyes whispered. "Too good," Kira murmured. "He's not hunting a convoy, he's hunting us." Reyes froze. "How the hell?" "Because I would," she said quietly. If my team got hit, I'd look for the one who did it. I'd find them, watch them, wait. Revenge has a pattern, too. Her finger rested on the trigger guard. Not yet, not until she was sure. Through her scope, she saw the man stop moving. He lifted his own rifle slowly, cautiously, aiming higher than the valley road. Right toward their ridge. "Move," Kira whispered. "He's zeroing us." Reyes ducked behind a boulder just as a round cracked past, kicking dirt inches from Kira's arm. Another shot followed, closer. She didn't flinch. She rolled left, resighted, and spotted him shifting positions. He was fast, experienced. Reyes marked the second shot's dust plume, 10 meters left from his last position. "Got it." Range 680, wind steady. He's compensating for elevation, means he's nervous. She breathed in, then out. For a second the valley disappeared, no wind, no noise, no distance. Just her and the target. The shot broke. The Dragunov's scope shattered. Through her lens she saw him jolt back, grab his weapon, crawl for cover, wounded but alive. "Hit," Reyes called. "Shoulder, maybe arm." Kira kept her scope steady. "He's retreating north into the rocks." "Orders." She hesitated. Command protocol said to hold position and call in the grid for air support. But this wasn't protocol anymore. This was personal. She picked up the radio. "Harding, this is Tennant. Engage third shooter. One hit, one moving north, requesting pursuit clearance." Static, then Harding's voice. "Negative, repeat, negative, hold position. We'll deploy a recon drone at first light." "Sir, if we wait, he's gone. He knows the terrain better than any of us." "Tennant, that's an order." Her hand tightened on the handset. She looked at Reyes. His expression said everything. He'd follow her lead. She dropped the radio gently beside her. "If we move now, we catch him before he crosses the ridge. You in?" Reyes hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way." They moved out low and fast, the sky dimming into violet. Every sound felt magnified, the crunch of gravel, the scrape of boots, the whisper of wind. Kira tracked faint blood drops between rocks, glowing dark against the dust. He was hurt but not slow. By nightfall, they reached the narrow gorge that fed into the next valley. The trail ended at a collapsed cave, just enough cover for one man. Kira raised a hand. They stopped. She crouched, steadying her breath. "He's inside," she whispered. Reyes nodded, rifle ready. Then a sound, a whisper of metal. Kira froze. The next second, a single shot ripped through the dark. Reyes gasped and went down, clutching his leg. "Reyes," she hissed, pulling him behind a rock. "I'm fine," he breathed through gritted teeth, through and through. She scanned the cave entrance. Nothing but shadow. Her pulse slowed again, dropping into that familiar stillness her grandfather called battle calm. She whispered to herself, barely audible. "The hunter who moves first loses." Then she waited. 5 seconds, 10. A glint barely visible, a scope reflection flickered deep inside the cave. She adjusted, slow as breath. Her finger rested on the trigger. The wind died. The shot came, fast and final. The echo rolled through the valley like thunder fatting over water. When the dust settled, the cave was silent. She held her scope steady, counting seconds until her hands stopped trembling. Then she exhaled, long, slow, steady. The radio hissed beside her. Harding's voice cut through the static. "Tennant, report. Tennant, do you copy?" She pressed transmit. "Target neutralized. Reyes injured but stable, sending grid now." There was a pause, then Harding's voice softened. "Copy that, Kira, I'll be damned." Kira sat back against the rock, the desert night wrapping around them like a blanket. Reyes looked at her through the pain, half smiling. "Remind me never to doubt you." She smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how often people do." The wind picked up again, soft and hollow, carrying away the last echo of gunfire. Above them, the stars looked brighter than before, cold, sharp, eternal. And for the first time since the killing began, the Tangi Valley slept. The medevac came at dawn. The sun rose slow over the jagged ridgelines, painting the valley gold, like the land was trying to pretend it hadn't swallowed so much blood. Dust hung in the air as the Black Hawk's rotors churned the silence back to life. Kira stood beside Reyes as the crew loaded him onto the stretcher. His face was pale, but he still managed a smirk through the pain. "Tell Harding I only got shot 'cause you're bad luck," he said. She almost smiled. "You talk too much for a man with a hole in his leg." He gave a weak laugh before the helicopter lifted, the sound fading into the wind until she was alone again, just her, the rifle, and the empty valley. For a moment she stayed still, listening. The wind carried the same whisper it always had, but now it felt different, quieter, lighter. She crouched and brushed dust from the ground where the sniper had fallen. There was no glory here, only the absence of something worse. When she got back to base, everything felt slower. The noise of engines, boots, and shouting soldiers, it all sounded distant, detached, like she was hearing it from underwater. Inside the operations tent, Colonel Harding waited, his expression unreadable. The map of the Tangi Valley lay spread across the table, now scarred with red ink and notes. He looked up when she entered. "Reyes is in surgery. They say he'll keep the leg," he said. Kira nodded silently. "You disobeyed orders, Tenant." She didn't answer. He sighed. "You went off comms, pursued without clearance, took a wounded man into a firefight." Still, she said nothing. Finally, Harding closed the folder. "I should write you up. Hell, if this were Garrison, I'd have no choice. But the fact is, you ended something the rest of us couldn't. That shooter's confirmed dead. Drone footage and recovered weapon match every signature we've been tracking for 18 months. He leaned back, studying her. "You did what you came here to do." She looked at him for the first time. "Then why doesn't it feel like it?" Harding didn't answer right away. "Because you've been living in a place where killing is the only form of progress. It's hard to come down from that." He dismissed her with a quiet nod. "Get some rest, that's an order." But rest didn't come. That night, Kira sat alone on the edge of the base, looking out toward the mountains. The stars over Afghanistan were the brightest she'd ever seen, almost cruelly so. She opened her grandfather's journal again, thumbing through pages filled with neat handwriting and fatting pencil sketches. On one page, he had drawn a jungle hill, annotated with distances, wind calls, and a small note in the corner. "Sometimes you don't shoot to kill, you shoot to stop the killing." She traced those words with her thumb. For the first time, she understood what they really meant. Because the truth was, she hadn't shot those men out of hatred. She'd done it out of duty and grief. 90 faces on a wall, 90 lives no one could bring back. Still, she couldn't shake the image of the last sniper, the one in the cave. His eyes in the half-light, steady, unafraid. There had been something familiar there. Not evil, not rage, just purpose. The same kind she carried. She realized then that they had both been doing the same thing, each believing the other was the monster. That thought sat heavy in her chest. For days she kept to herself. She skipped the mess hall, the gym, the easy laughter that soldiers forced into existence just to stay human. She preferred silence, observation. That was how she had always survived. When Harding finally called her back in, it wasn't for reprimand. It was for recognition. The command staff gathered in the dusty briefing tent. Cameras, salutes, formality. She stood still while Harding pinned the bronze star with valor on her uniform. "Staff Sergeant Kira Tennant," he said to the room, "for extraordinary heroism in action, saving countless lives in the Tangi Valley." Applause followed, polite, subdued, awkward. She nodded, said, "Thank you, sir," and stepped back. Afterward, she went outside and took the medal off. She turned it over in her hand, the bronze catching the sunlight like fire. Then she slipped it into her pocket. It didn't belong on her chest, not yet. That night she dreamed of Wyoming. The porch, the creak of the old chair, her grandfather sitting there, the sun setting behind him, his voice low. You can't win a war of ghosts, Kira. You can only stop chasing them. She woke before dawn, heart pounding. For a second she didn't know where she was. The tent, the cot, the smell of dust and sweat, Afghanistan again. And the ghosts were still here. Weeks passed, the valley stayed quiet, patrols returned without casualties, the wall of photographs in the command tent remained unchanged. No new faces. Harding started calling it the tenant effect. Kira hated the name. When her rotation finally ended 4 months later, she packed her rifle and the journal and boarded the flight home. The plane lifted from the runway with that same hollow sound of departure that every soldier knows, a mix of relief and guilt. She looked down at the desert growing smaller beneath her. It looked peaceful from up here. Beautiful, even. You'd never know how much it had taken. Back in the States, the air smelled different, heavier, wetter. She was reassigned to Fort Benning, to the marksmanship training unit. No more valleys, no more ghosts. Just young soldiers, fresh faces, sharp uniforms, and a hunger to prove themselves. The first day she walked into the training range, a group of recruits looked up, whispering. One of them muttered, "That's her, the sniper from Afghanistan." Kira ignored it. She set her gear down, unfolded her spotting scope, and watched a trainee miss his target 3 times in a row. "Wind's shifting," she said quietly. The kid flinched. "Ma'am." Left to right, adjust 1 click. He did, and the next shot hit center mass. His grin was pure relief. Kira nodded once. "Patience," she said. "It's not the rifle, it's you." Over the months that followed, she became something of a legend among the new snipers. They tried to imitate her calm, her control, the way she seemed to see things before they happened. But what they never saw were the nights she spent alone, sitting at her desk, staring at the journal, replaying the valley in her mind like a film that refused to end. Sometimes she'd walk out to the range after dark, when the world was quiet again. She'd set up her rifle, breathe, and aim at targets that weren't there. Not to practice, just to remember. One night her commanding officer, Major Dalton, found her there. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Never really learned how," she said. He watched her for a moment, then said, "You know, people talk about you like you're a ghost yourself." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Maybe I am." Dalton stepped closer. "You saved a lot of lives out there, Tenant, don't forget that." She nodded, but didn't look at him. "Saving lives isn't the same as living one, sir." After he left, she lay back on the dirt and looked up at the stars, the same ones that hung over the Tangi Valley. She wondered if the men she'd killed had seen them too, from their side of the world. Weeks turned into months. Students came and went. The war kept turning somewhere far away, indifferent to who carried its burden. Kira taught them everything her grandfather had taught her, not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to see patterns, how to wait. She'd end every lesson the same way. The hunter who moves first loses. Most of them didn't understand what it meant, not yet. But someday, in some distant field, they would. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at the wall of the classroom, not at the charts or maps, but at the empty space where, in her mind, she could still see the wall of photographs from Salerno. 90 faces, 90 names. They never really left. Late one evening, after dismissing her last class, she found a letter on her desk. It was from Ray's. His handwriting was messy but familiar. "Still walking, still owe you a beer. They say the valley been quiet ever since. Guess you were right, ghosts do leave footprints." She smiled faintly, folded the letter, and placed it inside her grandfather's journal. Then she wrote something on the blank page, opposite his final note. "The hunter who moves first loses, but sometimes waiting costs you more." She closed the journal softly, and stared into the darkness outside. The world was still dangerous. The wars would come again. New names, new faces. But maybe, just maybe, fewer walls of photographs. She sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the base generators and the faraway sound of distant thunder. Not the kind that kills. The kind that reminds you the world still breathes. And as the night deepened, a strange calm settled over her. Not peace. She wasn't sure she believed in that anymore, but something close. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. It started with a knock on the office door. Soft, deliberate. Not the kind used for courtesy, the kind used when someone already knows what they're about to ask will change everything. Kira looked up from the rifle maintenance log she'd been signing. Major Dalton stood in the doorway, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. "You got a minute?" She nodded, pushing the papers aside. He closed the door behind him. Command, putting together a joint tasking, counter-sniper advisory role, different theater. She frowned. "Where?" Dalton hesitated. "Eastern Africa, not combat deployment, at least not officially. You'd be training local units, advising, not engaging." She studied his face. "That's what they said last time." He sighed. "I know, but they're specifically asking for you. Someone upstairs still believes what you did in Tangi wasn't luck." "Luck had nothing to do with it," she said softly. He gave a tired half-smile. "That's exactly why they want you." She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the range where new recruits were practicing. The air was thick with gunpowder and pride. Dalton followed her gaze. "You've been teaching long enough, Kira. The army's full of people who can pull a trigger, not many who can think like you. Take the assignment." She exhaled slowly. "And if I say no?" "Then you keep teaching. But if you say yes," he paused, "you might actually get to stop another wall of photographs before it starts." That line hit her harder than he knew. She agreed that evening. Not out of ambition, she'd lost that long ago, but out of obligation. If someone was out there learning to hunt the way she had, maybe she could teach them something else: restraint. 3 weeks later, she was halfway across the world. The air in Djibouti hit like a furnace when she stepped off the plane. The horizon was flat, endless, more desert, more dust, just a different kind of silence. The advisory team was small: 8 Americans, a few British liaison officers, and a dozen local soldiers whose eyes carried the same quiet hunger she'd seen in every young recruit. The desire to belong, to be seen, to matter. She spent the first few days observing, no lectures, no ego, just watching how they moved, how they aimed, how they hesitated. They had skill but no patience, fire but no focus. On the 5th morning, she gathered them around a dirt mound used as a makeshift firing range. "Everyone wants to shoot," she began. "Few want to wait." Blank stares met her words. She raised her rifle, sighted on a target 500 meters out, then lowered it again. "Anyone can pull the trigger, but a real sniper," she tapped her temple. "He wins the fight before he fires, observation first, always." They watched her hit 10 consecutive targets from varying distances without missing once. No flourish, no smile, just silence. When she turned back, they looked at her differently, not with awe but with respect. One of them, a tall soldier named Nuru, approached after the session. "You teach like you've already buried your ghosts," he said in accented English. She studied him. "I haven't buried anything." He nodded. "Then you teach so no one else has to." The words lingered. Over the next month, her routine became predictable: early range sessions, tactical exercises, late-night reviews of terrain reports. She liked the rhythm. It was quiet, structured, simple. Until the call came in. It was 2:30 hours. Dalton's voice came through the encrypted line, low and urgent. "Tenant, situation update: local unit engaged north of your AO. 6 KIA. Long-range fire, single shooter. Pattern looks familiar. She froze. Sniper. Yeah, same setup. Rotating positions, precision hits. Whoever it is, they're not guessing. Her pulse slowed. The tone in Dalton's voice wasn't just tactical, it was personal. I need you on site, he said. Advise and assist. Rules of engagement stand. You're not cleared to engage unless fired upon. Copy that. But as she grabbed her gear and checked her rifle, something inside her stirred, that old whisper she'd tried to silence for years. The part of her that needed to know who was behind the scope. By dawn, she was on the road north with a 3-vehicle convoy. The landscape around them was endless ochre, scattered with rock and scrub. The radio chatter was minimal. No one liked to talk on missions that smelled of ghosts. When they arrived, the forward team's command post was little more than a few tents and an antenna array. The air smelled of burnt powder and fear. A captain greeted her, exhausted. 6 men down, all headshots, 3 different firing points. We didn't even see muzzle flash. Kira walked the perimeter, scanning. The terrain was too open for concealment, flat enough that heat mirages distorted every horizon. Whoever did this isn't local, she said finally. They're trained professional. The captain frowned. You think it's... I don't think, she interrupted quietly. I observe. She climbed a nearby slope with her binoculars. The wind was strong, constant, cutting across from the east. That alone would make long-range precision nearly impossible for most shooters. But this one had made 6 perfect hits. That meant one thing. He'd studied this ground. And maybe, just maybe, he knew she'd be coming. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the dirt, journal open on her knee, flashlight dimmed low. The words blurred as she remembered her grandfather's lessons. Patience is the most dangerous weapon you carry. But she wasn't sure patience would save lives this time. At dawn, she set up observation with Nuru and 2 other marksmen. Through the scope, she scanned the distant hills. Hours passed. Heat waves rippled across the earth, turning the horizon into liquid. Nothing moved, no birds, no wind-blown dust, just the silence of waiting. Then she saw it. A shimmer, small, precise, rhythmic. Not natural. Lens reflection. Contact, she whispered. The men froze. She steadied her rifle, breathing slow, her pulse sinking with each exhale. Range. 800 meters, Nuru said softly. Wind. 5 knots left to right. Through her scope she saw a figure lying prone beside a rock shelf. Movements crisp, controlled, not panicked. This wasn't a militant, this was a mirror. The first shot came before she could warn them. The round hit one of her team, a puff of dust, a choked gasp, then silence. Down, find cover, she barked. Her body moved on instinct, low crawl, position shift, scope realignment. Through her lens, she saw him reload, efficient, steady, deliberate. The way he handled his rifle, she recognized it. She felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just a trained sniper. This was her training. Her voice dropped. He's using my method. Nuru glanced at her. What do you mean? She exhaled slowly. That shot pattern, that cycle, the waiting, he's one of mine. The realization hit like shrapnel. Somewhere, someone she had trained, or someone trained by her students, had turned her lessons into something darker. For the next 3 hours the standoff held. Both shooters waited. It became a game of patience, the kind only 2 ghosts could play. She whispered to Nuru, he's testing me, seeing if I'll move first. So what do? We wait. Minutes turned into hours. The sun sank lower, the light shifted, shadows lengthened. And then a mistake. A flash of movement. His rifle barrel angled just slightly toward the glare, catching a line of sunlight. That was all she needed. She exhaled halfway. Held. Pressed the trigger. The shot cracked through the heat. Through her scope, the figure jerked, rolled once, and went still. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was wind whistling through the rocks. When they finally approached, Kira stayed behind. She didn't want to see, she didn't need to. But curiosity and guilt made her follow anyway. The man was young, too young, maybe 24. His uniform was clean, his rifle American-made, and on his wrist a faded paracord bracelet, the kind her students wore at Fort Benning. Her throat tightened. She crouched, staring at the dirt beside him. His notebook lay open, pages filled with meticulous notes in English. At the bottom of one page, a line was scrawled. "The hunter who moves first loses." Her breath caught. That night back at base, she sat alone by the radio tower, staring into the darkness. Dalton called in again. "Tenant, you okay?" She didn't answer right away. "He was one of ours, sir, trained by someone I taught." Dalton exhaled audibly. "You can't carry every ghost, Kira." She closed her eyes. "Then why do they keep finding me?" He didn't have an answer. When the line went dead, she opened her grandfather's journal again. The leather cover was cracked now, worn by time and guilt. She took a pen and wrote beneath the final line. "The hunter who moves first loses, but sometimes waiting isn't survival, sometimes it's surrender." She closed it gently, as if afraid the words might escape. Then she looked out toward the horizon, the endless stretch of desert that had seen too much and understood everything. And in that moment, she realized something her grandfather never had to learn. That every lesson, no matter how pure, could be turned into a weapon. The wind picked up, whispering through the base like an echo of something long gone. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just sat there, rifle by her side, and whispered to no one. "Maybe I was never the hunter. Maybe I was just the bait." The report was clean. Too clean. Kira read it twice, then a third time, sitting alone in the operations tent long after everyone else had turned in. The after-action summary said what command needed it to say. Enemy sniper neutralized. No friendly fatalities beyond initial contact. Operation successful. No mention of the rifle's serial number, American issue. No mention of the training notes in English. No mention that the man she shot might have once worn the same flag she did. The silence between those lines spoke louder than any sentence could. She looked up. The tent's single bulb flickered, humming faintly, its light trembling like her pulse. They were hiding it. And she understood why. Because admitting the truth meant admitting that someone had taken what she built, what she believed in, and turned it into something dark. She set the paper down, exhaling slowly. She didn't feel anger, not yet, just a strange, heavy stillness. Outside, the desert night pressed close, the wind whispering against the canvas. She pulled her grandfather's journal from her pocket, tracing the embossed leather cover with her thumb. Every time she'd opened it before, she'd felt grounded, connected to something honest, something sacred. But tonight, it felt heavier than ever. She flipped through the pages until she reached the last one she'd written. The words stared back at her. Sometimes waiting isn't survival, sometimes it's surrender. She closed it again, hard. A voice came from behind her. "You should be asleep, Staff Sergeant." Kira turned. Colonel Harding stepped inside, his expression unreadable, fatigue lines carving deep into his face. He wasn't supposed to be here. "Sir," she said evenly. He gestured to the chair opposite her. "Mind if I sit?" She didn't answer, but he sat anyway. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The tent creaked in the wind. Somewhere outside, a generator coughed and fell silent. Harding finally broke the quiet. "You've read the report." "I have. And it's missing the truth." He nodded once slowly. "I figured you'd say that." "Was he one of ours?" she asked. Harding didn't look at her. He was trained under a joint special warfare program, contract-based, went off the grid 6 months ago. Trained where? Harding sighed. Fort Benning. Her throat tightened. That's my unit. Was, Harding corrected softly. You're an advisor now. She stared at him, anger beginning to stir beneath the calm. You let them use my curriculum. We let them learn from it, he said carefully. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But it did. Harding rubbed his temples. Kira, you've been around long enough to know the system. Good ideas spread. Techniques evolve. You can't control what people do once the bullets start flying. She leaned forward. That's not a system, sir. That's an excuse. For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked up, his eyes tired. You think you're the only one who's haunted by what they create. Every commander carries ghosts, Tenant. You just gave yours better aim. The words landed like a slap. He stood to leave. You'll be rotated back to stateside duty next month. Take the time. You've earned it. She didn't stop him. When the flap closed behind him, the wind returned soft, whispering endless. That night Kira didn't sleep. She sat with the journal open beside her and the rifle across her lap, the barrel catching faint starlight through the canvas. Her mind replayed the shot again and again. The young man's face, the notebook, the handwriting, her handwriting. What had she really taught them? Discipline, patience, or the art of killing without remorse? At sunrise, she walked to the range. It was empty except for Nuru, who sat cleaning his weapon. He looked up, surprised. You don't rest much. Never learned how, she said. He nodded toward her rifle. You're going hunting. She shook her head, just listening. She set up her scope and aimed toward the horizon, not to shoot, but to feel the distance. To feel the wind, the stillness, the patience she'd built her life around. Nuru joined her after a while. They didn't talk. Soldiers didn't need to fill silence, they just shared it. After several minutes, he said quietly, You look for answers in the dirt, Sergeant, but dirt never speaks. She looked over, then what does? He smiled faintly, people, the living ones. That night she took his advice. She sat with her small team around a campfire, something she hadn't done in years. They told stories not of war but of home. Nuru spoke about the ocean, the way it could both feed and kill you. Another soldier, Perez, told her about his daughter who thought every star in the sky was a soldier's soul. When they asked Kira what she missed most, she didn't answer right away. Finally, she said softly, stillness, the kind that doesn't mean waiting for something bad to happen. No one spoke after that, but the silence felt different, warmer, human. In the following weeks, the operation's tempo slowed. The attacks stopped. The desert went quiet again. Command began withdrawing advisory teams, reducing presence. Another mission complete. Another forgotten story. But Kira couldn't let it go. One evening, she walked into the comms tent, where Dalton was packing up. I need access to the archived personnel files, she said. He frowned. What for? The shooter. I need to know who trained him directly. I want names. Dalton hesitated. Kira, command's closing the file. You're not cleared for. I didn't ask for clearance, she said flatly. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You'll find what you're looking for in folder Delta 7. Don't say I gave it to you. She nodded once. I won't. Hours later, she sat alone with the files spread across her cot, a web of names, ranks, training rosters. One stood out. Sergeant Michael Vaughn. Her former student, top of his class, transferred to a private defense contractor 2 years earlier. She remembered him clearly, calm, precise, polite. He'd asked smart questions, the kind only someone truly dangerous would think to ask. A chill moved through her. Vaughn had been training others, somewhere. She spent the next days tracing what little intel she could. Satellite images, contractor logs, quiet inquiries through old contacts, and what she found made her stomach turn. Private teams, off-the-book operations. Snipers for hire, teaching, advising, even engaging, all trained under variants of her original course. Her techniques, her words. Repurposed. It wasn't just one rogue shooter, it was a system. By the time Dalton confronted her again, she was already packing. "You're not authorized to leave base," he said. She looked up. "I'm not asking for authorization." "Where are you going?" "To find what we created." He rubbed his face. "You can't fix this alone." "I'm not trying to fix it," she said quietly. "I'm trying to end it." She left before dawn. One rifle, one pack, one purpose. The desert opened before her, wide, indifferent, endless. She followed rumors, intercepted calm chatter, pieced together fragments until she found them. A remote encampment, abandoned months ago. Faded targets riddled with bullet holes. Markers for distance, wind, elevation, all laid out exactly how she used to set them up back at Bennying. She stood there for a long time, the sun baking the back of her neck. This was her legacy. Not the medals, not the quiet valley. This. She walked to the far end of the range and picked up a fragment of a broken scope. On it, etched by hand, were 3 words. Tenants Rule 1. Her heart sank. She whispered to the empty air, "What did I do?" The wind offered no answer. That night she made camp alone. The stars burned white overhead. She took out her grandfather's journal again, its pages nearly filled now, her handwriting beside his, past and present bleeding together. She read his oldest entry aloud, voice trembling. "To hunt is not to kill. It's to understand. To see the world clearly enough that you don't have to pull the trigger." She closed her eyes. "I failed you, Grandpa." Then, after a long silence, she opened the journal to the last blank page and began to write. "If I taught them how to aim, I also have to teach them where not to. Killing doesn't take skill, living after it does." Her pen hesitated. Then she wrote one final line before the wind turned the page. "The hunter who moves first loses, but the teacher who never looks back loses more." She stared at the words until her eyes blurred. Then she tore the page out and tucked it into her pocket, not to keep, but to carry. Because she knew what she had to do next. She'd been the sniper, the hunter, the teacher. But now she had to become something else, the reckoning that her own lessons demanded. The desert whispered as she packed her rifle, its voice almost human now. She slung it across her back, looked toward the horizon and whispered, "No more ghosts." Then she started walking. The desert didn't forgive. It only remembered. Kira walked for 2 days before she found the convoy trail, faint tire marks cutting across the hard earth like scars. The wind erased them by day, but at night, under moonlight, they reappeared like old sins resurfacing. Each mile brought her closer to something she couldn't quite name, a reckoning maybe, or redemption, or both. By the 3rd night she reached the edge of a wadi, a dry riverbed that cut deep into the ground. Down there, tucked beneath layers of rock and shadow, was an old hangar forgotten by maps, but alive with recent footprints. She lay prone, scope steady, eyes scanning. No movement, but she could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes in the dark. She whispered to herself, "This is where they built it." The it wasn't a base. It was an idea, hers, stolen and twisted. The fieldcraft, the patience, the rhythm of the hunt. All those lessons she'd once believed in, now used by men who didn't care who they hit, as long as the payment cleared. She moved at dawn, quiet, invisible. Inside, the hangar was stripped bare, steel walls, scattered brass casings, empty crates stamped with markings she recognized from U.S. logistics chains. American equipment, foreign hands. She knelt, running her fingers across the dust. It wasn't old. Someone had been here within days, maybe hours. Then she saw it, a piece of cloth pinned to a board, a torn sleeve patch. The insignia was faded, but she'd know it anywhere. Fort Benning Sniper Course emblem. Her stomach twisted. Footsteps behind her. She turned fast, rifle raised, only to stop mid-motion. A man stood there, mid-30s, clean uniform, calm stance, weapon lowered. "Easy, Sergeant," he said. "You're trespassing." She didn't lower her rifle. "Michael Vaughn." He smiled faintly. "Guess my name's still in your files." He looked older than she remembered. Not broken, just colder. The light in his eyes wasn't anger, it was conviction. The kind that made wars last forever. "What is this?" she asked. He stepped closer, hands loose at his sides. "Continuation. You taught us to think ahead, right? To see patterns before they form." "This isn't what I taught." He laughed quietly. "You sure about that? Because everything we're doing, every setup, every shot came from you." She shook her head. "No, I taught you discipline, ethics, judgment. You taught us how to win." His tone hardened. "You just didn't understand the cost." He started walking the perimeter, gesturing toward the crates. "You think wars stop when governments say they do. You think ghosts like us get to just go home. Doesn't mean you sell what you learn to the highest bidder." He turned sharply. "I didn't sell it, I adapted it. When the army shut the door, someone else opened it. They need snipers. We provide them. The same way medics go private or pilots fly cargo, it's just another market." Kira felt her chest tighten. "You're building an army of hunters without rules." He smirked. "Rules don't stop bullets." She stared at him for a long moment. "You think this makes you free? It makes you a ghost chained to a paycheck." He smiled again, but there was something broken behind it. "You know what I learned from you, Sergeant Tennant. Waiting doesn't make you righteous. It just makes you late." She could feel the tension rising in her chest. "You killed our own." He didn't flinch. "Collateral misidentification, you know how it is." "No," she said softly. "I know exactly what it is." For a moment, they just stood there, two mirrors facing each other, the line between teacher and student blurred by time and regret. Finally, he sighed. "You came here looking for closure, but all you're gonna find is truth. And truth is ugly, Kira. It always has been." She lowered her rifle slightly, her voice quiet but sharp. "Then show me." He walked to a table at the center of the hangar. On it lay several folders, maps, photographs, target lists, each labeled, each stamped with corporate insignias, not military ones. She opened one. Inside, profiles of people. Not soldiers. Journalists, contractors, local informants. Marked with distances, wind calls, shot data. She felt her stomach drop. "You're killing civilians." He didn't deny it. "They're targets of interest. The people paying us decide who's dangerous. We just provide precision." Her voice broke slightly. "You don't even know who you're fighting for anymore." He tilted his head. "You think the army ever did?" The silence after that was heavy, suffocating. Finally she said, "Walk away, Vaughn, burn this place. Walk away before it burns you." He shook his head. "You don't get it, this isn't a place anymore. It's an ecosystem. If I disappear, 10 others will replace me, and you, of all people, made that possible." He looked down at her rifle. "Funny, isn't it? The student becomes the ghost the teacher can't catch." Her eyes met his. Everyone thinks they're the ghost, until the dark starts whispering back. He laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was something closer to sorrow. "You really believe you're still one of the good ones?" "No," she said. "I just haven't stopped trying." She turned to leave. Behind her, Vaughn called out, "If you walk away now, this doesn't end." She paused. "It never does." As she stepped outside, she felt the wind pick up again, hot, dry, endless. But beneath it, something else. A sound. The metallic click of a safety being disengaged. She dropped flat. The round tore through the doorway where her head had been. She rolled, took cover behind a rusted vehicle, scanning for movement. Vaughn's voice echoed through the hangar, still faster than most, but not fast enough. She didn't respond. Her breathing slowed. She counted seconds between wind gusts, adjusted her position, and waited. He was good, better than she remembered. He moved in silence, firing, shifting, never staying long enough to be cornered. It felt like Tangy Valley all over again, except this time her enemy had learned from her every move. She whispered under her breath, "The hunter who moves first loses." Her grandfather's words steadied her heartbeat. Vaughn fired again, closer. She spotted the muzzle flash, faint, right side, upper platform. She shifted left, crawling low through debris, counting his reload rhythm. 4 seconds between shots, 2 to relocate. When the next pause came, she rose just high enough and fired once. The echo slammed through the hangar, dust raining down. Then silence. For a long moment she didn't move. Then cautiously she advanced. Vaughn was on the platform, slumped against a support beam, blood on his chest. He looked up at her, eyes strangely calm. "Guess I moved first." She knelt beside him. "You didn't have to." He gave a weak smile. "Neither did you." He coughed once, blood flecking his lips. "You know what scares me most?" She waited. "That I believed in you, more than I ever believed in anyone." His breathing slowed. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling, the steel beams, the sunlight filtering through holes like falling stars. He whispered, "You can't kill what you created." Then he went still. Kira sat there for a long time. No anger, no relief, just a cold, hollow ache where purpose used to be. When she finally stood, she picked up his notebook, pages filled with diagrams, firing logs, quotes. One page made her stop. Tenant's Rule 2, the hunter who moves first loses. Below it, Vaughn had written in smaller letters. But sometimes the teacher moves too late. Her hands shook as she closed the book. She spent the next few hours burning everything, the crates, the files, the maps. The fire roared through the hangar, thick black smoke clawing at the sky. Flames reflected in her eyes, dancing like the ghosts she'd never been able to bury. By the time she walked away, the entire structure was collapsing behind her, steel melting, memories turning to ash. She didn't look back. That night, miles away, she made camp beside a dry stream bed. The desert was silent again, but it wasn't peace, it was aftermath. She took out her grandfather's journal one last time. The leather was scorched around the edges now. She opened to the first page, the one written in his careful hand. "A sniper's duty is not to kill, it's to make killing unnecessary." She stared at it until the words blurred. Then she closed the book gently and whispered, "I failed that part." The wind answered with silence. She sat there until the stars came out, countless, cold, endless. And for the first time in years, she didn't reach for her rifle. She just looked up, eyes wet, whispering into the night. If patience was my weapon, maybe forgiveness has to be too. The flight home was silent. Kira sat by the window, head resting against the cold glass, the world outside shrinking beneath the clouds. The hum of the engines filled the space where thoughts should have been. She stared at the horizon until it blurred, the blue melting into white, the light into emptiness. For once she didn't feel pride, or guilt, or even exhaustion, just absence. The mission report said unauthorized operation resulting in successful elimination of hostile combatant. Command was closing it fast, sealing it behind classified codes and quiet handshakes. No court-martial, no commendation, just disappearance, the kind reserved for things the Army didn't want to explain. She had done her job, again. And once more, no one would talk about what it cost. When the plane landed, the air felt heavier. America smelled different, rain, fuel, asphalt, but it didn't feel like home anymore. At Fort Benning, her re-entry brief was perfunctory. A captain she didn't recognize read from a checklist: medical clearance, psychological evaluation, decompression training. His tone was polite, sterile, mechanical. She signed where she had to, Answered what she could. Any recurring nightmares? Sometimes. Flashbacks. Depends what you call them. Do you feel anger? She looked up, wouldn't you? He didn't ask again. The evaluation ended with a signature and a printed phrase. Fit for reassignment pending administrative review. Fit. It sounded wrong. That night, she walked to the range again. The same range where she'd trained hundreds of soldiers years before, now empty under flickering floodlights. She ran her fingers along the concrete barriers, the worn targets riddled with holes. Ghosts didn't need faces anymore. They just needed echoes. She raised her rifle once, sighting an empty target 800 yards out, and lowered it again. She couldn't fire, not because she'd lost her aim, but because she couldn't find the reason. A voice came from behind her. You still measure distance the old way. She turned. Major Dalton stood there, hands in his pockets. He looked older too, or maybe just weary. Didn't know you were back, she said quietly. I heard what happened. Then you know it's over. He nodded, for you maybe. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He walked closer. You burned their base, their files, their network, but you can't burn an idea. Vaughn wasn't the only one using your playbook. Her jaw tightened. You saying there are more? He nodded. Contractors, splinter groups, some already overseas. Whatever you started out there, it spread. Kira exhaled slowly. Then it's my fault. No, he said. It's our fault, the system's fault. You just gave it form. He looked at her for a long time. You know they're going to investigate, maybe even call you in to testify. I've got nothing to hide. I didn't say they believed that. She didn't respond. Dalton studied her face, the same stillness, the same controlled breathing. You remind me of your grandfather sometimes. Her eyes softened. You knew him. I served under him. Vietnam briefly, he was a good man. He taught me everything I know, she said quietly. Dalton nodded. Yeah, but he also knew when to stop fighting. He turned to leave, then hesitated. You don't owe anyone redemption, Kira, not after everything you've done. Then why doesn't it feel finished? She asked. He looked back. Because peace isn't something you earn, it's something you choose. He left her standing there under the floodlights, a silhouette of a soldier in a world that no longer needed her. The weeks that followed blurred together. Debriefs, paperwork, quiet stares in hallways, the kind that said she's the one. Rumors spread fast. Some said she'd gone rogue. Others said she'd been sent to clean up someone else's mess. The truth was quieter, too quiet to believe. One morning, she was summoned to Washington. The Pentagon looked the same as it had the last time she'd been there. Cold, polished, indifferent. They made her wait 2 hours before ushering her into a conference room lined with flags and silence. A colonel she didn't know spoke first. Staff Sergeant Tennant, you've been briefed on the purpose of this inquiry. Yes, sir. You acted outside the chain of command, engaged an American national, destroyed classified property. She met his eyes. I also prevented a network of trained mercenaries from targeting civilians. He tapped his pen. Not the point. Then what is? The point, Sergeant, is that the Army doesn't get to choose its ghosts. We bury them quietly. For a moment the air went still. She leaned forward, her voice calm. With respect, sir, you can bury ghosts, but not consequences. The colonel's jaw tightened. You're not here to moralize. No, she said softly. I'm here because no one else wanted to admit they built this. A long silence. Then finally, a woman at the far end of the table, civilian suit, intelligence division, spoke up. You realize, Sergeant, that if your report becomes public, it won't stop the machine. It'll only move underground. Kira's gaze met hers. Then maybe it's time the light found it anyway. There was something in the woman's eyes, admiration, maybe, or fear. "You're dismissed," she said quietly. They never called her back. Days turned into weeks. No orders, no assignments, just quiet suspension, the kind that felt permanent. She filled the time by teaching again, but the recruits didn't see her the same way. She wasn't legend anymore. She was rumor. At night, she'd walk the perimeter of the base. The air was cooler here, thick with pine and rain. Sometimes she'd hear distant thunder and wonder if it was storms or gunfire somewhere else in the world. She'd tell herself it didn't matter, that she was done. But her heart never believed it. One afternoon, she found herself driving aimlessly through the back roads of Georgia, out past the training fields, into the quiet stretches of farmland that reminded her of home. She stopped at a diner off Highway 80, the kind with chipped counters and coffee that never ran out. A kid behind the counter recognized her name from the patch on her jacket. "Ma'am, you're the sniper from that story, right? The one from Afghanistan." Kira paused, then smiled faintly. "That story's gotten taller over the years. My brother watched a video about you," he said. "Said you saved like 90 guys." She looked down at her coffee. "No one gets saved out there. Some just live longer." He didn't know what to say after that. When she got back in her truck, she sat for a long time before turning the key. The fields outside stretched endless, golden under the fatting sun. For a moment, she let herself imagine a different life, one where she'd never enlisted, never carried a rifle, never learned to breathe between heartbeats. But then she thought of the wall, 90 faces, 90 reasons she'd done what she did, and she knew she couldn't wish it away. Back at her apartment, she unpacked the last of her gear. Among it was her grandfather's journal, battered, burnt around the edges. She hadn't opened it since Africa. She sat by the window, rain whispering against the glass, and flipped to the last page, the one where she'd written her own line months ago. "The teacher who never looks back loses more." She touched the words with her fingertips. Then she turned the page, blank, waiting. For the first time, she didn't write anything. Instead, she whispered, "I'm done chasing ghosts." The rain outside softened. The sound reminded her of the wind in the valley, gentle, endless, patient. She closed the journal and set it aside. Then she reached into her duffel bag and pulled out the bronze star Harding had given her years before. The ribbon was faded, the metal scratched. She turned it over once, then placed it on the windowsill. Not as a trophy, as a gravestone. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, no seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed anonymous. "Your fire didn't kill everything. Some of us are still here, training, learning. We're not ghosts, we're shadows, but we remember who taught us to see." No name, no signature, just coordinates somewhere in the Middle East. Kira stared at the paper for a long time. The wind outside rattled the blinds. Then she folded it neatly and set it beside the metal. She didn't know what she would do. Not yet. But she knew what she couldn't do. She couldn't pretend that walking away was peace. Because ghosts don't stop calling when you stop listening. That night she drove out to the range one last time. The lights were off, the air damp from the rain. She lay prone in the mud, rifle in hand, breathing slow. She aimed at the farthest target, but not to shoot. Just to see. The moonlight shimmered off the metal plate 1,000 yards away. Perfect sight picture, steady hands, still heart. And for a brief moment, she remembered what her grandfather once said. Stillness isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of understanding. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and whispered to the night. "Then maybe I'm finally still." The shot never came. Only silence. And in that silence, for the first time since the war began, she didn't feel hunted. She felt human. Morning came slow. The kind of gray dawn that doesn't warm anything. It just reveals what the night was hiding. Kira hadn't slept. The letter sat on her kitchen table, its corners curled, its words burned into her mind. We're not ghosts, we're shadows, but we remember who taught us to see. She must have read it 100 times, tracing the coordinates, hearing Vaughn's voice echo through memory. You can't kill what you created. She poured coffee that had gone cold hours ago, stared at the map spread across her counter, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: fear. Not for herself, but for what might come next. If those coordinates were real, it meant the network lived. If they were, then someone wanted her to believe it did. Either way, silence wasn't an option anymore. She drove south that afternoon, long stretches of road lined with pine and ghosts. The radio stayed off. The world didn't need more noise. By sunset, she reached the small airfield outside Savannah. An old contact from her days in country, former pilot, ex-Navy, the kind of man who asked no questions as long as the cash was real, met her by the hangar. "You don't look like someone going on vacation," he said, eyeing the duffel over her shoulder. "I'm not." He nodded toward the coordinates written on the folded paper. "That's a war zone." "They all are," she said quietly. He didn't press, just handed her a flight manifest with no name, no record, no trace. "You'll want to pack light. It's a long way to nowhere." The flight was 12 hours of turbulence and silence. The kind of silence that hums in your bones, the silence before a storm, before confession, before something ends. Kira watched the ocean fade into desert again. The colors were different here, more red than gold, harsher somehow. She felt the weight of her rifle in her lap, the familiar ache in her shoulders, and wondered if it would ever stop feeling like part of her body. When she landed, the heat hit like memory. Dry, relentless, alive. The coordinates led her to the edge of a ravine, half-buried structures, camouflaged by rock and neglect. But they weren't abandoned. Fresh tire tracks, footprints, smoke curling faintly from a generator vent. She crouched low, watching through her scope. Movement, too, maybe 3 figures, silhouettes shifting among crates, too deliberate to be scavengers, too armed to be harmless. Then she saw it. A patch on one man's shoulder. Her insignia. Fort Benning sniper course. Her stomach twisted. She waited until dusk before moving in. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. Empty casings glinted under her boots. Maps were pinned to the walls, topography charts, grids, firing patterns, every detail sharp, precise, familiar. And then she heard a voice behind her. "You really did come." Kira turned slowly. A woman stood there, younger, late 20s maybe, hair tied back, uniform stripped of markings. Calm eyes, steady hands. Recognition hit before words did. "Lena Rourke," Kira said softly. "You were one of mine." The woman smiled faintly. "You remember." "How could I forget? You were top of your class." "I learned from the best." There was no mockery in her tone, just quiet certainty, the kind that came from belief, not arrogance. Kira lowered her rifle slightly. "Why send the letter?" "Because you needed to see what you built." Lena gestured toward the walls, maps, schedules, marked targets. "This isn't about contracts or politics," she said. "It's about control. If we train ourselves, if we sell our skill where it matters, we decide who lives, who dies, not some general behind a desk." Kira's voice was low. "You think that's justice?" "I think it's balance," Lena said. "You showed us how to be invisible, but you never taught us what to believe in once we disappeared." The words cut deep. Kira exhaled. "You think you're fixing the world by taking lives." Lena shook her head. "We're preventing worse ones. Precision saves more than it kills. You said that once." "I said that before I learned what it costs." Lena stepped closer. "You came here to stop us, but stop what exactly? A handful of soldiers trying to build order out of chaos. You don't get to judge us. You made us. Kira's eyes softened. I made soldiers, not executioners. Lena tilted her head. What's the difference? The silence that followed was heavy. Kira had asked herself that same question too many times to count. Finally she said, intent, that's the difference. Lena studied her, expression unreadable. You still think intent matters? Kira nodded slowly. It's all that ever mattered. They stood there for a long time, 2 generations of the same ghost, each convinced the other was wrong. Outside, the wind picked up. You could stay, Lena said quietly. Help us train the next wave, make it cleaner, smarter. Maybe then the blood means something. Kira shook her head. Blood never means anything, it just stains. Lena sighed. Then I guess we're enemies now. No, Kira said softly. We're the same, that's the problem. Lena's hand moved toward her sidearm. Kira's didn't. Don't, Kira said gently. You pull that trigger and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to silence the sound it makes. For a moment Lena's eyes flickered doubt maybe, fear. Then she lowered her hand. Kira stepped forward, took something from her pocket, the torn page from her grandfather's journal, the one she'd carried for years. She placed it on the table between them. Read it, she said. Lena looked down. The handwriting was faded but clear. The hunter who moves first loses, but the teacher who never looks back loses more. Kira's voice was steady now. That's the last thing I ever wrote, because I realized I'd spent my whole life teaching people to wait, but never to ask why. Lena didn't answer. Kira turned to leave. Behind her, Lena called out softly, if we stop fighting, someone else will start. Kira paused in the doorway. Then let them, maybe they'll do it better. She walked for miles that night, the desert glowing faintly under a pale moon. Every step felt lighter, though she couldn't explain why. When she reached a ridge overlooking the ravine, she stopped and looked back. The compound lights flickered like dying stars in the dark. For the first time, she didn't feel the pull to go back, to fix, to hunt. She took out the last of her ammunition and laid it on the ground, 1 round at a time. Each one was a memory. Each one a name she couldn't forget. When the last bullet was gone, she stood. The wind picked up, scattering sand across the metal casings until they vanished. She whispered to the night, they don't need hunters anymore. Months later, back in Wyoming, the world felt quiet again. Her grandfather's old house still stood, creaking porch, chipped paint, and the same view of endless plains that had taught her patience long before the army did. She sold her rifle, donated her gear. All that remained was the journal, its cover cracked, its pages worn thin by time and war. She spent her mornings fixing the fence, her afternoons walking the property line. The air here smelled of dust and pine. No gunfire, no orders, just wind. Sometimes she'd catch herself scanning the horizon, instincts still sharp, but there were no enemies here, only sky. She started writing again, not reports or logs, but reflections, about stillness, about forgiveness, about the cost of understanding what others refuse to see. She wrote, maybe ghosts never die. Maybe they just fade when you stop giving them names. One evening, she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee as the sun sank low. The light stretched across the plains, warm and endless. She thought of Harding, Dalton Vaughn, Lena, Ray's her grandfather. Every name carried a piece of her story. Every silence carried the rest. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes not from happiness, but from acceptance. For the first time, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel haunted. She just felt alive. As dusk settled, a car approached down the long dirt road. A young soldier stepped out, clean uniform, nervous posture. Staff Sergeant Tennant. Just Kira now, she said softly. He nodded, fumbling with a small package. This came through your old unit, thought you'd want it. She took it, the box was light. Inside, a folded note unsigned. For what it's worth, we stopped training them. You were right, some things shouldn't be taught. Below it, her old insignia, the sniper patch, edges burned. She held it in her hands for a long time, then looked at the soldier. You ever shoot long range? No, ma'am. Good, she said. Keep it that way. He smiled uncertainly and left. Kira sat there until the horizon swallowed the sun. Then she took the patch, laid it on the porch railing, and let the wind carry it away. The last trace of what she'd been drifted into the fading light. She leaned back, eyes closed, listening to the sound of crickets and the soft creak of the rocking chair. In her mind, she could still hear her grandfather's voice. The hunter who moves first loses. She smiled. Not anymore, she whispered. Because in the end, she'd stopped hunting. And finally, the world stopped hunting her back. The stars began to rise, quiet and cold. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried one last truth. The kind that doesn't need a rifle, a target, or a mission. It just needs peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.